Coming up, we take a look at this week's White House Tribal Nations Summit. And can tribes play a role in co-managing public lands? I'm Mille Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from Indian country today.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is Indian Country Today.
Amirawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mille Chavez. In Minnesota, the Mille Band of Ojibwe and the state's Historical Society are working to preserve and present Indigenous culture. Historically, the relationship between museums and tribes has not always been positive, but organizers say this collaboration hopes to change that. The Mille Band of Ojibwe is storing some of its cultural artifacts in the Minnesota Historical Society's museum. And in return, Michael Wilson, an archivist working for the band, visits the History Center to share cultural knowledge with museum visitors.
The everyday aspect of it is a little different. Like Travis will call me up. He'll say, we have a school group coming down. We need someone to skin beavers. Can you come down and skin beavers for this school group and show them how it's done? Yeah, no problem. I'll be right down. Let me put on my beaver skinning pants.
Currently, the band is working to catalog and preserve bandolier bags created by its citizens. The effort to preserve Indigenous languages is happening all around the world. In Australia, Victoria's Indigenous languages are under threat of extinction after years of cultural erasure. Fluent speakers are in short supply, and it's rare for children to learn the Aboriginal language of the land that they live on. A new program is dedicated to training Indigenous language teachers in First Nations languages. In Geelong, a city southwest of Melbourne, 24 primary schools are offering Indigenous language classes. Auntie Lee Healy is an elder from the Tungarong Nation, and she's teaching a pilot program to get fluent speakers qualified to teach.
It is important for the next generation to be able to teach their Aboriginal language on country, where it belongs and where it will always be, a living language like it was for our ancestors long ago.
Experts have predicted up to 80% of Aboriginal languages could die out with the current generation if intervention does not happen. Continuing with language, the University of Kansas is known for its language departments, and a young scholar is carrying on that tradition. An interest in Mayan culture is uniting two very different research projects by Assistant Professor Ignacio Carvajal. The professor is studying a variety of documents from the colonial period, mostly in Spanish and the Mayan dialect Quiche, and he has also added Quiche words into his own poetry. An affiliate of the university's Indigenous Studies program, he is now working on the creation of Quiche learning materials.
There's a lot of diaspora folks whose parents have immigrated or who they themselves have immigrated, and I think it's a beautiful dream to have more materials where folks can learn their ancestral languages, basically. And I try to study that as well and be part of that conversation, I guess.
Carvajal says he hopes to begin teaching Quiche at the university in the fall of next year. The hoop dance is taking center stage in a New York City adaptation of The Nutcracker. This holiday season, hoop dancer Shawn Lawrence will be dancing her hoop style in a performance dedicated to her brother, who passed away. Nakota Lawrence, a three-time world champion, made headlines by appearing in the production over the last few years. Nakota taught Shawn his innovative technique when she was young. Shawn will be making her own mark on New York City audiences with her own original choreography and style.
The energy that we bring to the stage, something I really am cherishing and want to continue is presenting Native American arts in theater, on Broadway, in a big show like this. So this is a step up for us to continue and to continue thriving.
Shawn Dean says if you're in Brooklyn, you should get tickets to this reimagined holiday classic before they sell out. And those are the headlines for Indian Country today. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Coming up, a virtual summit raises the profile of Native concerns in Washington, and Kevin Washburn joins us to reimagine what the management of public lands could look like. Stay with us.
This is Indian Country Today.
The White House Tribal Nations Summit is a wrap. It brought together tribal leaders with high-level policymakers. Under the Obama administration, Jody Archambault helped implement this historic gathering in a nation-to-nation discussion. ICT editor Mark Trahan spoke with her earlier this week.
One of the biggest aspects of the Tribal Nations Conference is that you have a number of cabinet secretaries who want to speak to tribal nations. This Tribal Nations Summit provides an opportunity for those cabinet secretaries as well as the president to reveal, unveil some of the accomplishments and achievements that they've had, with the president sitting in office stating to his cabinet members on a weekly basis that he wants to have a better record, a greater not just engagement, but a turning of the page of history with Native nations. That's something that is hard to do in terms of getting the visibility on it. But with the Tribal Nations Conference, it's a time where the president and everybody else sits in front of the press pool, stating to the world how they're doing on some of the things that the tribal leaders are asking for. And certainly the tribal leaders have been engaging at the cabinet level since this administration came in office. But when President Obama, when we first started the Tribal Summit, it was something that was a very rare occurrence for people to be meeting with high levels of the federal government in any capacity. It was a rarity. And with the Tribal Nations Conference, those are just everyday situations. You'd have like an agency like EPA or HHS prior to 2009, who would have regular engagements with tribes through their advisory councils. But this Tribal Nations Conference and the White House Council on Native American Affairs creates a regular rhythm of high-level officials coming together and sort of one-upping each other on what they're able to accomplish in partnership with tribal nations. This isn't top-down. This is tribal nations coming to the table with real policy asks, and the people who are in office turning to their staff and getting them to execute on it this is on a weekly basis. This isn't just a one-off every 2 years or so.
Land management has been a long-standing issue between tribes and the federal government.
There should be, and there must be, bigger conversations about reparations and how that looks with the land that has been taken over the years. The land loss is well over 98% for tribal governments. Our land is what makes America. And just some of that idea that this is a time for, I guess, the reckoning of how America was built should open up more of those kinds of funding sources so that tribes are not having to pinch and scrape by with whatever little resources they have. And those kinds of transactions aren't just about money to purchase lands or to move lands into tribal control. It's also about stewardship. It's also about co-management, which is really exciting to see some of those secretarial orders come out about the co-management. There are a number of tribes who are better suited to care for some of the public lands that have been neglected. And you can look at examples such as the Yakama Nation or Menominee, and their forests are phenomenal. They are above and beyond. They're internationally recognized for the stewardship and the excellent forest health. So those are things that we should be looking at, not just looking at conservation groups to figure this out. Indian tribes should be at the table.
That was Jody Archambault on the White House Tribal Nations Summit. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at what co-management of public lands could look like.
This is Indian Country Today.
At a time when Indigenous-led conservation is crucial to addressing climate change, conversations are beginning about what co-management of public lands could look like. David Troyer, an Ojibwe author and historian, wrote in Atlantic Magazine that management of national parks should be given to tribes. Also writing about the idea of co-management of public lands is Kevin Washburn. He's the dean of the University of Iowa College of Law and was the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior in the Obama administration.
I think we all have maybe different visions in our minds of what that is. And, what Troyer said was that we should give the national parks back to the tribes, in essence, because they're our most iconic landscapes, and many of them are beloved by tribes. That's one approach, and that wouldn't be co-management. That would be land back, basically, to tribes. But what co-management means, it means something different to different people. And what tribes are interested in is protecting their sacred sites, protecting the wildlife, protecting their ability to do hunting and gathering, from big game to roots and berries to whatever it is. And of course, I said sacred sites. So tribes are interested in a lot of things related to management of public lands. What that looks like could vary dramatically. One, sort of smaller thing that tribes can do is get more involved in the interpretive aspects of national parks, where they come in and they provide better education than is what is currently happening at those parks about the importance of that landscape. So that's not really co-management, but it's a partnership, and so that's relatively modest, but we could work up to tribes actually being contracted to manage these lands, manage all the aspects of the lands, from controlled burns to timber cutting and harvesting to all of the things that happen on these lands.
Where did the idea of tribal co-management of public lands start for you?
When I was Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs during the Obama administration, tribes came in quite a bit to talk to me about federal public lands that they had an interest in one respect or another, whether it was, sacred places on those lands, whether it was something they were mad about the way things were being run. And as Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, I oversaw the Bureau of Indian Education, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and some other offices, but I didn't oversee the BLM or the Fish and Wildlife Service. So the best I could do was to get the tribe a meeting with the agency that they wanted to talk to, the Park Service or whoever it was. I didn't have any authority over that. And so it was frustrating to be the Assistant Secretary and have a big role in Indian Affairs, but not really being able to make those things happen. And so really what I realized is those agencies need to come to the table. And what we have now, what's changed since then is we now have a Native American who is the Secretary of the Interior. Deb Holland of Laguna Pueblo is running the whole shooting match at the Department of the Interior. And so my hope is that the agencies will be interested in doing things that I think are consistent with her vision. And I suspect her vision includes a greater role for Indigenous people in the United States and Native American tribal nations. And so that's kind of where the idea came from. And I think the idea is ripe at this moment. We have such leadership in the Department of the Interior right now for Indigenous people.
The federal government contracting with tribes is not new.
Tribes they've asserted themselves for the last 50 years in a really strong way. They have undertaken lots of contracts with the federal government. So most of the work of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education and the Indian Health Service these days is done by tribes. More than half of the work of those agencies has been contracted to tribes to run. So, and when that happens, the tribe gets the resources and provides the services, but it's a federal responsibility that they're meeting, often treaty responsibilities. So tribes have really increased their ability to run federal contracts, and they get scrutinized. They have to do audits and go through all the scrutiny that happens with federal contractors. It's a little bit different in the Native American context, but in essence, they are federal contractors and they get a lot of the same scrutiny. So point one, tribes are much more capable these days. They're accustomed to doing these sorts of things and working with federal agencies. Point number two, I think that the United States is reckoning more than it ever has in the past with broken promises and the really bad circumstances that have led to poverty and problems on Indian reservations.
How can tribes play a role in managing climate change?
The Biden administration has really made climate change a central focus of its efforts. Number one focus, of course, is dealing with COVID-19. But climate change is such a serious problem, and the Biden administration is committed to dealing with it. One of the ways they've committed to dealing with it is through this 30 by 30 program, which is to conserve 30% of American land by 2030. That's a very ambitious goal to protect that much land, really, and we only have nine years or less than 9 years now to do that. And so if the Biden administration wants to accomplish that, it really needs tribes as partners. And tribes have long been interested in good stewardship of lands, obviously. They did it well for centuries and centuries before the United States ever came along. And they've got deep experience in doing that, obviously, as well. So I think that tribes are as interested as anybody in addressing the climate change problem. And this is a way for them to partner. One of the things to keep in mind is tribes are, in many respects, the most vulnerable communities in the United States to climate change because they are in the coldest places and the hottest places. And those extremes are going to get worse with climate change. So tribes are, they've always been interested in good stewardship, and they're very motivated to help with climate change. And this is a tangible way for tribes to be part of the 30 by 30 initiative and other initiatives to protect land and address climate change.
That was Chickasaw citizen Kevin Washburn on the co-management of public lands. Indian Country Today celebrates its 40th anniversary this year. Patty Tholahongva gives us a history lesson about the media company's origins. Let's take a look.
The creation story of Indian Country Today starts 40 years ago in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Tim Gallego was the founder and editor. He named his newspaper the Lakota Times and provided the news for the Oglala Lakota.
Well, we were Lakota Times up until about 1989 for about 8 years. And at that point, I started getting requests we were really strong on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I mean, our paper was selling out every week on the reservation. And pretty soon Rosebud wanted us to start delivering papers at least there, so we set up drops and started delivering Rosebud. Then pretty soon Cheyenne River, Crow Creek, and pretty soon we were on all the reservations in the state of South Dakota, all 9.
Years ago, Gallego and his staff were writing about the trauma of boarding schools. And soon, people across the country were subscribing to his newspaper.
Then we expanded beyond that. We had to start getting a lot of readers in New Mexico and Arizona and other places, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota. So we thought, well, the name Lakota is strictly, like for our paper here, it's like the Navajo Times is for the Navajo people. But now we're more of a national paper, so we came up with the name Indian Country Today. In fact, Avis Little Eagle came up with that name. So we made the change.
After a few decades, Gallego sold the paper to the Oneida Nation. Ownership changed again when the Oneidas gifted it to the National Congress of American Indians. And then Mark Trahan was brought on board to guide the news outlet into the digital age. At the start of 2019, there were 4 employees of Indian Country Today. By the end of that year, there were several more. and we continue to grow both our broadcast side and our digital side. Today, our parent company is Indig Public Media. We are a nonprofit news organization, and that's why we need your help. Now more than ever, news relevant to our people is needed. Indian Country Today launched a weekday newscast at the start of the pandemic to keep tribal leaders and citizens informed about the coronavirus. This is the country's first television newscast produced by an all-Indigenous news staff. And despite the pandemic, we continue to grow, both in our staffing and our reporting. Our main office is in Phoenix, Arizona, and we have 2 bureaus, one in Washington, D.C., and another in Anchorage, Alaska. We have correspondents like Marionette Pember based across the country. She's traveled to Minnesota to cover land defenders and to the homelands of the Meskwaki Indians in Tama, Iowa to cover the country's only caucus held on sovereign Indian land. And she's even featured Native youth.
I'm here on Madeline Island in Wisconsin, and this is a very important place for Ojibwe people. Behind me you see some boys and girls playing lacrosse, which is a traditional Ojibwe game. It's the creator's game. And I'm here covering a number of events, demonstrations of Ojibwe art and crafts and traditional teachings. This is the kind of thing that we cover at Indian Country Today.
Meet a few more of our staff.
Bonjour. My name is Dalton Walker. I'm the Deputy Managing Editor for Indian Country Today. I'm coming to you from the homelands of the Peeposh and Atam people on the banks of the Salt River in what is known as the Phoenix Valley. Working for Indian Country Today is a blessing. Each day, we get to report on issues that matter to you, to me, to all Native people and beyond. Miigwech.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Anwal Boysell. I am one of the producers and reporters for our TV broadcast team. I travel all over the United States. I've covered stories from Nebraska to Wisconsin, and even down in Oklahoma, where I'm actually from. One of my favorite memories is getting to go ice fishing up at the Potawatomi tribe up in Wisconsin, where I met a guide. His name was Ryan Alloway, and he took us out ice fishing. And I think the biggest thing that I saw was the community.
Caitlin also reported on a first responder in Oklahoma who donates his art to help other first responders. And she also spoke to the first Native American astronaut, John Harrington, about what it's like to quarantine in space. Our staff is committed to bringing you these stories from Indian Country, and we need your help.
Hi, I'm Shirley, Snavy, Vice President of Broadcasting for ICT, and I am really grateful to be able to bring you stories like this. The statue behind me is Suzanne LaFlash Peacock. She was the very first Native American doctor, man or woman. And she was on the Omaha Reservation and did amazing things for Native people. And we want to share these stories with you, and we can do that with your help. Please take some time to make a donation to IndianCountryToday.com. Thank you.
Supporting ICT is important because having informed communities reinforces tribal sovereignty.
We want to help educate people about Indian Country, our people, our issues, and our victories.
Indigenous journalists hold newsmakers accountable and are the best defense against inaccurate portrayals. Thank you for your support.
You can see the passion for our work runs deep, and in the early case of Mark Trahant, the bug for news started at a young age.
When I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I don't know exactly when, I had a cartoon crayon newspaper that I delivered around the neighborhood. I do remember it was called The Sun, but I don't remember what kind of stories were in it or what I did other than with crayons.
He says both his father and grandfather loved to read and instilled that love in him.
I like the idea of being able to pick up different newspapers and seeing how the world was covered differently by, we used to get the Idaho State Journal and the Blackfoot Morning News and sometimes the Salt Lake Tribune. So we saw kind of a different variety of views. In addition to the crayon newspaper, a tour of the Idaho Falls Post-Register when I was in Cub Scouts. And I remember asking the editor what it would take to get a tribal member on the front page.
Now, just about every day, Indian Country Today posts a story featuring a Native person on the front page.
We're here on the campus of Arizona State University at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. One of the things that I think is important about ICT and building a partnership with Cronkite is we can offer internships. I think what's so extraordinary is if you look back since we started, several of the folks who came from internships or fellowships are now full-time employees.
That's another mission for us, to build that next generation of Indigenous journalists who know Indian country and can tell our stories, especially at this unique point in history. Never before has Indian country been so well documented from the perspective of Indigenous journalists.
Hi, my name is Max Montour, and I'm a newscast video editor here at ICT. What excites me most about being a part of this team is how we're all contributing to an archive. It is an Indigenous perspective captured through the pandemic. From our newscast to all of our digital stories, we're documenting how we all reacted and dealt with current events. Future generations will have the ability to look back and hopefully learn from moments like these. And with the help of our funders, we're only going to be able to capture more of what it was like to be Indigenous today. So thank you all for your help. It is greatly appreciated.
Happy anniversary, ICT. For more Indigenous news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. Stay safe, my relatives, and have a great weekend. I'm Mille Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This